Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of Rant Radio. I'm your host Lauren, and I will be going off today about a subject that, even though it occurs in the mainstream media quite a bit, what you may know about this subject could be completely inaccurate, and that's about the state of Israel and Palestine and the constant conflict that has been going on in that area for decades, and how this impacts our U.S. foreign policy, and how Israel single-handedly stops the news and the real information from getting to your television screens every day. So what I'm going to start with is a recent news clip that just came out, and it talks about a protest that was held in Palestine along the border of Israel. Now, all the news and the information that I got this week about the conflict was from BBC News. I didn't use any American media outlets to get the coverage that I wanted to use for this segment, because I learned recently that a lot of what you hear is completely false. And the reason I came across this was because of a documentary that I recently watched, and that's what inspired this segment for me. It was a documentary that was made in 2003, and it talks about the media blackout over what's really going on in Palestine, and how every news headline, every single story that's aired in America is with the Israeli influence, and this Israeli is manipulating literally the media that we receive. And this documentary shows how, for years, Israel has strategically packaged every story that comes out, and how basically journalists in America are completely bought off. They're sold out. They are told exactly how to write about the subject, what attitude to take with every story, and even as much as simple wording that can completely change your opinion about what's really going on. And Israel, of course, being a huge ally in the U.S., and we support them very, very bigly. We give them $7 billion worth of aid a year, and over 2/3 of that budget go towards military spending in Israel. For a country that is the size of New Jersey, the size of the military force in Israel rivals most superpowers in the world. Now, why would they need such a huge military? Well, it's because they are constantly in a conflict with Palestine, and they have waged wars with their other neighboring Arab countries as well. But most recently, the conflict has stayed in Palestine and in the occupation of Palestine itself. Now, what people may not even know is that Israel has been occupying Palestine since 1967, and this is in direct violation of international law. It is illegal for this occupation to exist, and the UN has stated that it is against the world peace treaties that have been founded years ago after World War II. But Israel does not care, and Israel is insistent on not only occupying Palestine, but destroying the lives and the well-being of all of its women and children and everyday citizens that try to live in their native country. And all the Arab nations around the area, such as Jordan and Egypt, have had to take in refugees, and millions have had to migrate out of their homeland because of the Israeli conflict that has been pushed upon them for so long. So this most recent news headline that came out in BBC News Online talks about tent protesters that were violently evicted from a protest that was held in the West Bank near the E1 block. Now, Palestine is divided up into sections, and they're labeled with letters. So there's Section A, Section B, C, D, E, and E1 is actually an area that is a proposed settlement. Now, if you guys don't know this, Israel has been setting up settlements in Palestine for years. Currently, there are over 500,000 Jews that live in Palestine illegally. And once again, these settlements, they totally violate international law. So you have 500,000 Jewish citizens who live in Palestine in these guarded, gated communities, and they are on Palestinian land. So one of the newest areas, E1 settlement, is especially coming under fire by the Palestinian people because of where it's located. It's right off the area of East Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is considered, of course, the Holy Land by Christians, Muslims, and Jews alike. All around the world, people praise that land as very, very sacred. But Israel and Palestine have been arguing over the status of that area and whether or not it is the state of Israel or the state of Palestine. And that's where the conflict started. So all of these fights and all of these deaths have all been over this one little section that is considered holy and sacred. And that's why there can be no peace. Because neither side can come to any kind of compromise as to what to do with that land. So most recently, protesters, basically, they set up an encampment along the West Bank near East Jerusalem, and they planned on setting up a village as a way to symbolically protest these settlements by setting up a counter-settlement. Now, of course, Israel's military came in and they evicted all the protesters. Now, the media reported that there was no injuries on the Palestinian side. Palestinians claim that 6 were injured in this eviction. This is, again, a perfect example of how the reporting varies depending on who you're listening to. If you listen to Israel, everything happened very quietly and smoothly. If you talk to Palestinians, they will tell you otherwise. So basically, the Palestinian activist group, which is known as the Popular Struggle Coordination Committee, they're the ones that were reporting on this story. Israeli police reported nothing out of the ordinary about the eviction. So this is just one example of the efforts of the Palestinian people to protest what they know to be a illegal occupation. And if you watch any mainstream media in America, very often what you see is the Israeli deaths in these conflicts along the borders are dramatized. They're sensationalized, and we identify with the loss of life on the Israeli side. However, when Palestinian deaths are reported, if they're reported at all, it's done in a very nonchalant way, and the attitude is these are just some more militants that were caught in the crossfire, and that they're just being violent. And what you see a lot is a spin on even the images themselves that come out of this nation, is that the Palestinians, when they're throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails at military, it is shown as a retaliation of the Israeli military to be trying to suppress the violence, when in fact the Palestinians are responding to decades of violence and no resolve to the conflict. These people have been oppressed. They have had their homes bulldozed. They've been wrongfully evicted from their homes, claiming that they don't have valid permits, even though they are on their own land and have deeds to prove it. Because Israel has gained control of this area, they dictate whether or not anything that a Palestinian says is actually valid. So this goes to the roads. All roads through Palestine are heavily guarded, and there's checkpoints everywhere. A normal drive that could take somebody 10 minutes going through Palestine now takes 2 hours. And there's constant checks of your paperwork and your ID and whether or not you have the authority to be in that area. I watched this documentary, and I swear to God, it was painful to watch as women, older women, were not able to get to their homes when they went out grocery shopping because they passed through a checkpoint and they're told, go away, turn around, you can't pass this road. People have no defense against this. And the Palestinian community in general has been trying to live despite the lack of resources and the destruction of their homes and the constant state of terror that they live in. As this oppressive military constantly patrols their streets with tanks, and there's the constant shot of gunfire and bombs going off, not to mention the drones that pass over Palestine all the time. And of course, we know that America is funding this conflict. America spends billions of dollars aiding Israel only so that it can go into Palestine and bomb and destroy its communities. And that's what this is. This is a mass extermination of people. This is a way to wipe out a community so that Israel can take Jerusalem for itself. And that's all it is about. And we are funding this war. We are funding it. We are not the anti-terrorists. We are the terrorists. And that's why the mainstream media won't tell you this shit, is because we are funding terrorism. We are funding people that illegally occupy a country that gives the word occupy such a bad connotation in that part of the world. It's the reason that Occupy has striven to try and redefine this word, because this is what it's about. Occupation should not mean the hostile takeover of innocent people's lives and communities. It should mean mean an opportunity to take back land that is theirs or ours, and to claim it for the people, and to claim it in the name of freedom. Not to hostilely come into a community, destroy its people's way of life, and then claim that it has the authority to do so, even though it's recognized differently in international law. Now, I hate the fact that the UN won't take any stance on it other than that. You don't see anybody coming in to enforce international law, and that's what angers me. Not only does it anger me that the mainstream media has been bought off by the Israeli PR campaign, but they can't even have the decency to put a call out to the UN and do something about it. What is the UN really for? And I blame them as well for the reason that the Palestinian people have suffered as long as they have. And thank God that these neighboring Arab nations, who mostly have come to peace with Israel, have taken in refugees. But there isn't a lot of talk of how refugees can come back to Palestine and finally have peace in their own country. Now, most recently, the status of Palestine, which Palestine has been trying to be recognized as a sovereign state for years, and they've never gotten anywhere with the UN because they're always outvoted. And most recently, they were able to upgrade their status with the UN to a non-member observer state. So that doesn't give them a whole lot of pull. They're allowed to be a part of general assemblies, but what they're not allowed to do yet is have any kind of prosecution in international law. Now, even though Israel is blatantly violating international law and committing war crimes and crimes against humanity on the Palestinian people, they have no way to get any sort of retribution. There's no way to prosecute Israel for what they've done to the people because they're not being recognized as a state. And one of the countries that's helping to put a damper on this effort is the U.S. Now, what the U.S. did the last time, most recently, that Palestine was able to get this status was they suspended funding from UNESCO. And what UNESCO is the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And they were one of the few that voted with Palestine. I mean, there were over 100 nations that recognized Palestine as their own state. But unfortunately, in the UN, that's not enough. But so UNESCO acknowledged Palestine as a nation that should be its own state. Now, what happened when they did that? The U.S. decided to suspend all funding to this organization. Now, why would they do that? Because they don't want Palestine to become a sovereign nation. They don't want them to become an independent state. Because then they might just get enough power to turn around and throw all these war criminals in jail. And that's what they're trying to avoid. Israel has a PR campaign not only to manipulate the news that comes out of that area and make us favor Israel, but they want to suppress Palestine's ability to govern themselves and put the lockdown on these goddamn criminals. And that's why they don't want this to happen. And that's why the news that you really need to get is from Europe. It's not from the U.S. You have to seek out other international outlets to get this information. You will not find it here. The only place you may find it is on the alternative news sites, and a lot of them don't even come out of the U.S. So that's how the U.S. treats Palestine's efforts to become a state, which I think could help them resolve some of this conflict, because if they could show what the Palestinian people have gone through for decades, they may be able to stop this military occupation. I'm getting verklempt just talking about it. So $7 billion a year in aid. Over 3/4 goes to the military so they can bomb the crap out of Palestine. Good job. So let's see a little bit about Israel. And we're about halfway into our segment here. So Israel is very densely populated, and again, it's about the size of New Jersey. It's the only state in the world that has a majority of Jewish population. And this state was created after World War II, and it was the culmination of the Zionist movement. And what the Zionist movement wanted was to have a homeland for Jews that had been scattered around the world. And Israel for years has been a land where all Jewish immigrants could come and live, and they can visit Jerusalem. So that's always been a selling point of Israel, is that it is the home of the Holy Land. And the Zionist movement was meant to make that land sacred so all Jews could have that place to come back to. Now, all of this sounds well and good, except they're killing their neighbors to try to keep this land sacred. And I'm sorry, but that goes against the teachings of most biblical texts. You don't rape and pillage and bomb and destroy lives in order to preserve lives for others. It just doesn't work that way. That's why the saying "an eye for an eye" has been so poignant, because you can't commit one crime to try to save yourself another. It just doesn't work that way. So there have been hundreds and thousands of Palestinians that have been displaced, and this dates back to the late 40s, at which time the neighboring Arab nations took them in, and Israel has absorbed all the Jewish populations. But right now, the Palestinian profile, there are about 11 million people living in Palestine, and 3 million are suffering under the military occupation of Israel. And neighbor Jordan, which is at peace with Israel, they take a bulk of the refugees as they flee across the border. And so what other things divide Israel and Palestine? What really is their beef with each other? Well, obviously the status of Jerusalem. They all argue that that's their holy land and that is also their capital. So, again, this is a political and religious fight. There's also the fate of the settlements. 500,000 people living illegally in Palestine. What's going to be done about that? Even if Palestine is recognized as its own state, what do they do with 500,000 people that are living within their borders? You know, all these people, they have a problem with Palestine. They wish that all the Palestinians would just go away. They're very, very racist towards them. They're very, very violent towards them. And they live in gated communities that are very well protected by the military. And when they venture out into the Palestinian turf, they're very hostile with the community. And counter-protests have been held by the Jewish settlers themselves against Palestine. And all of this is deep-rooted in hate and I think a lot of misunderstanding. But we don't get that kind of reporting here. And also, in 2008, a major military assault on Gaza was to halt cross-border rocket attacks, because there are Islamic extremist groups in Palestine. So the Hamas, which is one of the major militant groups that took control of Gaza, that is where a lot of the conflict goes back and forth. And they are the ones that are armed and are more able to try to counteract the constant Israeli military presence. So there is a constant back and forth there with these groups. Now, the precise location of borders between Israel and Palestine is also fiercely debated. And this is because Israel has chopped up Palestine so much. So it's really hard to draw the line as to where Palestine ends and Israel begins. So those borders are constant hotspots for conflict. Not to mention, there is the major portion of Palestine, and then there's Gaza, which is a smaller strip. So they're separated by Israel, which engulfs the entire area. And Israel evacuated settlers from the Gaza Strip in 2005. It withdrew all of its forces, but then once the militant group Hamas, when they started occupying Gaza, the military of Israel stepped up and then decided to start using economic blockades of the Gaza Strip, really trying to cut off Palestine's resources and cripple their economy. And because Palestine's only other resources are its aquifers, the Palestinian communities are really, really suffering to sustain themselves while Israel just chokes them and really cuts off their ability to be independent. So this is where we've been at. And again, the prosecution of war crimes. Israel knows damn well that it's committed crimes against humanity, and it wants to ensure that Palestine does not have the ability to seek justice in that department, because a lot of people could go to jail. This is no different than what we saw with the invasion of Iraq. This is the same kind of tactic, where it's a bunch of media blackout tactics, and then we go invade a nation in the name of one thing, and we do a complete other. And we have committed genocide in Iraq, and we have committed genocide in Afghanistan, and the same thing has been committed by Israel in Palestine, another one of our allies. So this is what the U.S. likes to roll with. This is the kind of company they keep. And I think that if we can wrap ourselves in that kind of context, and we can understand that we really are one nation under shame, then we can better understand our news for what it is, that it's not news, that this is Israeli propaganda, and that we don't truly know the whole story. We don't really understand the history of the conflict, and that we are taking things only at face value. But we have to be smart journalists ourselves, Every single one of us has the ability to get on the computer and to do research and to learn what is the different view and what might be actually going on the ground in Palestine. And it makes us better thinkers. It makes us better debaters. And it's what enables us to draw better conclusions and to know where we stand on issues. And that way, when we go to a protest, we have something to say. The next time we go to a rally, you have something to strike up in a conversation with your neighbors. This is always going to be a heated topic. But if we come from a place of understanding and real knowledge and hardcore facts, then we will always be taken seriously and respected by anybody we talk to. And that's what enables us to do the kind of citizen journalism that Jack and I like to do. And that's why I like doing this segment, so that we can better inform all of you guys. So, is there anything else I can say? Well, I can say that if you guys look up that documentary, I can't remember the name of it offhand, but if you search documentary films on YouTube, it's one of the first 5 that comes up. And I encourage you guys to watch it, because it's really incredible to see, and of course this being a little bit dated, how serious it was in '03, and how little has actually changed in the area, and how really just disappointed I am that so many people that know they're doing wrong just have too much money and too much time to cover it up, instead of doing the humane thing and saying, let's just fuck it. Let's just stop fighting over a piece of land. Let's learn to coexist, and let's learn to get past our past and past the war, and learn that we are just people. And honestly, if they all followed the same book and they followed their own gods to the truest form of virtue, and I think what the Bible's really about, then they would see that all they're really fighting over is a complete lack of compassion. So guys, I'm going to end my segment a little bit early, because I do want to mention once again that this is our final segment of Rant Radio at Occupy Storefront, and soon Jack and I will be embarking on an amazing journey, and I encourage all of you guys to tune in and watch what happens, because we are going to we're going to tour the country, and I think that it's hard to say what we are going to do. I know that what we're not going to do is just sit around and wait for the action to come to us, because we're going to be going straight to where it's happening. So if you guys know of something going on in an area that we're headed, you guys can follow us on our website, which is still being constructed. You guys can follow our Facebook page. You can also follow Jack and Lauren on the Twitters and the Facebooker world, and Jack will be rattling all of that off at the end of the program, because I can never remember the exact ones and semicolons and dashes and dots and all that sort. But thank you guys once again for tuning in. If you've got any ideas for upcoming segments or any information you think I should see, definitely send it to my email at laurendee85@gmail.com. That's laurend85@gmail.com. Thank you guys so much for watching and giving us your support. I'm going to give it over to Jack, and he's going to give you all the little details.
Thanks, Mark, for posting that. I was actually about to say the blog site. Also, Occupy Bus Tour on Facebook. And like Lauren said, if you're not already, please follow us on Twitter. It's at JAK_NLAUREN. That's at Jack_and Lauren. And you can also find our WePay on there, on the Ustream page, if you're looking to help us be on our way to other places and bigger things. It's always appreciated.
All money goes towards traveling costs. We're pretty self-sustaining, so anything that you guys can give, or anybody you know who wants to support us on this tour, please do. We do appreciate it, and we'll be seeing you guys on the road.
Thank you, guys. You have a good night.